Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This morning, we're going to spend some time talking about material shortage and pricing volatility. And we're joined by some really talented individuals this morning that I will introduce shortly. But before we do that, we're going to talk about some housekeeping items to address for the webinar to make this as efficient and as effective as possible. Number one, you're going to be getting some PDH certificate. It will be emailed to you after this event today. We are going to ask some poll questions today, but we're going to do that a little bit differently. We're going to ask a series of 3 questions right up front to kind of give us a baseline as we jump into this content today. We would like you to submit questions. We've had a significant number of questions come in about this topic already. We likely won't get to all the questions today, but those we don't get to, we will follow up with afterwards as well. So please submit questions as we go throughout the day. Question and answer period. The majority of today is going to be focused on question and answer. We're going to have one short session talking about a few things, and then we will open it up to questions and answers. And this session will be recorded today. So if you have concerns about that, it is going to be recorded. If you have any technical difficulties, you can call Ben Fiddler at 319-640-5736. He can answer any technical questions you have. So with that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Eric Hasselbusch. I'm with Benchmark. I'm an account manager and a partner at Benchmark. I've been in the industry since 2011. And my primary focus is helping clients develop long-term strategies and plans for managing their roof and pavement assets. Reid Ribble with the NRCA is the CEO of the NRCA. We are very fortunate to have Reid with us today. He has got a tremendous amount of experience, not just in the roofing industry, but in global experience as well. 30 years as an owner of a roofing contractor in Wisconsin, in the U.S. House of Representatives, and heavily involved in NRCA as CEO today. So very fortunate and thankful to have Reid here today for his insight to this current situation. Thanks, Reid. And we have Ron Harriman. Ron Harriman is the president of Benchmark. He's a senior consultant and partner as well. And Ron has been in this industry for a long time. I think Ron has got a real unique ability to helping people solve difficult and challenging roof-related issues. So Ron, thanks for joining us today. And then Andrew Reynolds. He's a professional engineer, graduate of Iowa State, and one of our technical heavyweights within Benchmark. He's really, really sound when it comes to technical questions, and glad to have Andrew on here today as well. So let's just one quick slide about Benchmark and one about the NRCA. Benchmark is a roof and pavement consulting firm. We've been around since 1983. We're a privately owned company. We focus on 3 primary services: evaluation of assets, design, bid, or engineering services, and then construction phase services or quality assurance during the construction phase of a project. In addition, we are now providing drone services for aerial imagery, for both infrared and high definition imagery. And all these things really roll up in kind of what I'd call a roof management program approach or philosophy. We're headquartered out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with our pavement division headquartered out of Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. And we have 22 satellite locations or people throughout the country providing services as well. So that's enough about Benchmark. We'll talk a little bit about the NRCA. The NRCA is an outstanding association, and they touch pretty much every aspect of the roofing industry, from education, technology, advocacy, and they touch all categories from architects to government agencies. So a very good resource for our company and other companies in the industry, and thankful to have Reid here today. So before we get started in this webinar, I want you to understand there's 3 things we want you to take away from today's session. Number 1, what are some of the drivers behind the supply chain issues and price volatility? What are other companies doing? How are they managing this situation? And what options do you have if you can't get materials today? So we'll touch on those things primarily through questions and answers today. As we move into a series of poll questions, there are 3 poll questions we'd like you to ask. I'm going to share those with you. A poll box will come up. I'd like you to answer those questions, and then we will discuss those a little bit before we jump into the webinar. The poll questions will kind of provide us with a foundation or baseline to start from today as we talk through these issues. So number 1, how much of a delay have you experienced in regard to material availability impacting project start dates? That will have, I think, 5 answers to that question with timeframes. Number 2 has roof contractor labor availability negatively impacted roofing projects you were involved in. That will be a yes or no question. Then, do you feel the roofing industry is providing the required resources to help you navigate through these issues? And that will be a multiple choice question. So the poll should be coming up shortly, and here it is. So you can scroll on the right hand as you scroll down through those poll questions. We'll let you answer those, and we'll give you 30 to 60 seconds to answer those. It looks like we've got some answers coming in, but if you could keep filling those out, that would be appreciated. We're going to close this shortly, probably in the next 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll. We should see the answers shortly. All right, so let's take a look at these. How much of a delay have you experienced in regard to material availability impacting project start dates? As we look at no change, 13%, 1 to 2 weeks, 5%, 3 to 4 weeks, 9%, and 1 to 3 months, 33%, and 3+ months, 41%. So 74% of our attendees are experiencing some what I would say significant impact to projects. So we'll have some good questions coming in today, I'm sure. Let's look at the other issue. Has roof contract labor availability negatively impacted roofing projects you're involved in? Yes, 40%, no, 60%. I think what we'll learn as we talk a little bit today, labor issues and labor availability in the roofing industry is not a short-term issue. It's a long-term issue that we've been facing a long time. But it is a problem for some right now. And then, do you feel the roofing industry is providing the required resources to help you navigate these issues? Disagree, 6%, somewhat disagree, 24%, somewhat agree, 53%, and agree, 16%. So it looks like the roofing industry has done and provided some information, some good information, but looks like there may be some opportunities for improvement to help people navigate through these issues. I hope today, after we spend this time, you'll have a better understanding of some strategies you can implement to help work through this process right now. So let's go ahead and close this poll. And we're going to move into the next section, next section. And we're going to jump into, Reid Ribble is going to share about the supply chain and what's happening. There's really a couple things Reid's going to share. But first, Reid has been heavily involved in webinars over the last several weeks, and he's got several coming up in the future because the NRCA and Reid's position, he has access globally to what's happening. This is not just an issue in the United States, but globally. So Reid will kind of provide a global overview today of what's going on, what is happening today, how did we get here, and then finally, some things we can talk about on what we can do. So with that, Reid, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Boy, it's really great to be with you all. And I have a big opportunity to talk to contractors and other industry experts and industry partners from consultants and designers like here at Benchmark, as well as manufacturers and distributors. But getting to talk to end users is a real treat for me. So I'm going to take a few minutes today, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, to try to get you into a place where you understand what's actually going on and why we got here. And so, first of all, you need to understand that the U.S. roofing industry is facing an unprecedented supply chain disruption. And what I mean that, and I've talked with contractors that were in business back in the 60s and 50s, some of the real senior leaders of NRCA back in the day. I was started my roofing company in 1977. And so I've been around for about 40 years. I have never seen this level of disruption ever in my career. Now, we've had issues with labor shortages throughout that time, but to have a broad-based disruption like this is just unheard of. And the surprising thing is usually when a disruption occurs is that it typically will occur in one sector or the other. It might be in steep slope residential roofing or commercial and low slope roofing, but rarely is the entire industry impacted like it's been here. And this disruption is spanning almost every type of roofing product, from asphalt shingles, lightweight metal products, fasteners, reinforcement mats, the polymers that make these products, and the polymers that make insulation and insulation itself. And so depending on the type of roof assembly that you have, you might be able to get 4 or 5 components, but without that 5th component, you're still kind of stuck where you're at. And so this is a real problem, and it's industry wide. Go ahead, Eric, to the next slide, and let's talk about how we got here. And so, first of all, I want to take you back to March 1st of 2020, about 15, 16 months ago. And that's when the US government began to really start understanding what it was we were facing. And having talked with friends of mine at the White House during that time, when they first started hearing about COVID, they literally were thinking that this was another flu type of epidemic, something like the swine flu, things like that, or SARS. But that was transmitted when people were symptomatic. So the fact of the matter is, if you could see or know that you had or were carrying the disease, you could basically quarantine yourself and not pass it on. But in late January, it kind of became clear that we were dealing with a disease that was able to be passed on asymptomatically. So you could be carrying the disease and not know that you were carrying the disease. And that became a totally different game at the federal government level. And I can tell you, it was practically panic stricken at that point at the government level, because what do you do when people do not feel sick, but are in fact sick and passing a disease on? And ultimately, first part of March, there began to be talks of shutting down our borders and beginning to quarantine. And in fact, NRCA as an organization on March 18th, 2020, sent everybody home. We went to a telework environment, and we are still in that telework environment today. And so we don't anticipate getting back in the office until September, unless, of course, this new Delta variant causes us to have a different level of concern. But this pandemic was not limited to the US. What started in China became a global disruptor. And I mean, it disrupted everything. And since we are in a global economy, as our trading partners began to realize what was going on and they began to shut down their economies, everything got disrupted. So US government sends everybody home basically and said, we need to sit still for a while. And you remember late in March, President Trump was saying, hope to be open back up by Easter. That didn't happen. Well, you need to understand that about 80% of all roofing, 80 to 90% of all roofing materials, whether they're asphalt shingles, EPDM, TPO, whatever roofing system you're using, those systems for the bulk of the roofing contractors in the country are passed on through distribution. So they'll go to a distribution supplier and that roofing contractor will get the materials from there. When this happened, when the shutdown happened, distribution did not know how long this disruption would be. Originally, we were looking at the Chinese experience and we thought, okay, about 90 days, things will settle down. And so distribution stopped purchasing. And if 90% of your purchases stop cold as you're going into a season, how is a manufacturer going to respond? Well, that manufacturer is going to respond by slowing down production because they don't know when that purchase chain is going to pick up again. And so there was almost a full stop last March, April, and May in the manufacturing side. And then when we began to realize that we could be in this for the long haul, our organization, NRCA, with our staff in DC, began to push really hard to make sure that the roofing industry was deemed an essential service. And so our members were able to get back to work in almost every state, but about 5 or 6. And so, but we had this stoppage. And now going into the season, we had a demand spike, but there were no product in the pipeline. They've never really caught up from that moment. That then got compounded by government action. If you remember, there were a number of stimulus checks that were sent back to consumers throughout the country. And never in US history has the government stimulated our nation's economy at 50% of GDP, which is exactly what happened during this disruption. So there was a massive influx of money into the economy to try to keep the economy going. And so there was also a spike up in demand. And this was really true in the institutional space. So if you were a school district, a university, a hospital, or a nursing center, those institutional purchasers were really aggressive in purchasing, particularly last summer. And this huge spike up in demand just put the manufacturing community further back. Add to that the massive fires that occurred in the northwest of the US in 2020 and late 2019. That was a spike in demand there. There were numerous hurricanes. 3 of them went through the Mobile, Alabama, and Florida Panhandle last year. And so there was a spike in demand. Then take us to what happened in Texas in 2021, in the winter of 2021. They had these freezing temperatures. And for those of you that are not aware of it, Texas, Louisiana, that region of the US is the largest refining region of oil in the world. And so a lot of the polymers that come from petroleum are refined in that area. When that freezing temperatures happened and the power shutdown occurred there for 2 weeks, basically all those polymers that are required to make our products stopped moving. So you've got this kind of compounding factor of the disruption of global supply chains, the increase in demand by climate, and then you have the energy and freezing temperatures in Texas that shut down our refineries. And all of these things contributed to basically shoving everything back. And if that was not bad enough, we had a ship that blocked the Suez Canal for nearly 3 weeks, and so shipping from the Middle East stopped. And then we had trade wars going on and tariffs being imposed with our trading partners, some friend and some foe, that exacerbated this whole thing, particularly in the fastener space, because a lot of the wire and lightweight metals that are used in the roofing industry are imported from Canada, Europe, and China. All of those had tariffs that were imposed. And so no one thing was really specific to it, but all of them together created the problem that we had. And that's where we're at today. Let's go to the next slide. And so what do we do about it? I mean, this is a real problem because you are not able to have your roof that you need, and maybe you need it today. And what we've been telling our contractor members is to be communicating with their consumers about what the schedule is actually going to be in the best way possible, with the mindset that to that consumer, to that end user, to your customer, to the roofing contractor customer, that roof is their most important problem. And if that roof is leaking or you've got a real problem there, it becomes critical. And so what you need to do as an end user is you need to be communicating with everybody as you can in the supply chain of what your needs actually are. So you need to be talking to the folks at Benchmark or your roof designer. You need to be communicating with your roofing contractor about what your current needs are, especially if you're having any type of serious problem with leakage that could stop or shut down your plant, your school, whatever it is, the type of business that you're in. And the more they know about what your needs are, not just in the moment, but what you think your future needs are, it will help them be better equipped to supply those needs. Because we do not anticipate that we're going to get through this supply chain problem until possibly the second quarter of 2022. So we're now in the second quarter of 2021. This disruption is likely to last into next year's roofing season, because it'll take all winter to build up inventory adequate to meet the demand. And so you need to be communicating what is going on with your contractors and your designers and what your needs are, not just today, but tomorrow. Second thing you need to do is you need to communicate with your internal customers, and you need to do it repeatedly and often about any changes that you're hearing of, because you've got internal customers that are anticipating a disruption from this roofing project, or they're experiencing a disruption from leakage, and they need to know what exactly is going on. I've often told my own kids as they were growing up and they had some disappointment in their life, that disappointment is nothing more than the gap between someone's expectation and someone's reality. And the more their expectation reality is out of alignment, the greater the disappointment. And so I cannot reinforce enough with you the need to communicate, because you can bring expectations back into alignment with reality, and then some of that frustration that you're experiencing can dissipate. And so communicate, and then you need to plan. And then there's a lot of disruption in pricing. We've seen price notices of 100% increases. I even saw one major manufacturer send out a notification that contractors should expect price increases up to 100% in the next 6 months, but they wouldn't say what they would be and incrementally when they would be coming, but they were trying to let people know. And so you need to be really cognizant that roofing contractors and designers are going to be cautious about promising prices today on materials that can't be delivered for 6 months. And I know that that's difficult for you from a consumption standpoint, but that's the reality that they're living in right now. And that's why communication and planning and then ultimately flexibility are just so essential to this process. And it's really, really critical that happens, and that you build language into those contracts that allow for that. And it might be language that whereby you're notified of what the price of a particular component of that roof is at the time you sign the contract, and you're only going to pay the net difference on that price between now and when it gets delivered. Because you can anticipate that contractors and designers are going to try to do what they can on contract language to protect them from that same risk. And at the end of the day, what you want is to be treated fairly, and you want to know what that is to the degree that you can know it. And what I'm telling you is that it's very, very difficult for anybody to tell you what the price of a roofing project will be even 3 months out. It's just that hard to do. And so you should be anticipating price increases between now and then. And then the last thing I want to drive home is the importance of the relationships that you have with your designers and contractors. Those relationships are critical. And I just know this from my own standpoint as a contractor myself for 30 years. Those customers that were repeat customers that were continually using us, when we had eras of disruption, we made sure that they were first in line. And so building that relationship, having a good relationship, and having long-term relationships with your designers and contractors really matter in moments just like this. Because if you have a contract with somebody, then you get frustrated in 3 months and you cancel it, all you're doing is starting over. And now you're at the back of the list for somebody else. And so to the degree that you're communicating and building long-term relationships, that's going to play in your favor because it's a natural human response is to try to respond to those customers that have brought your company to the place that you're in right now, based on those long-term relationships. And so contractors are sensitive to it, designers are sensitive to it, and quite frankly, in your own business, your customers are sensitive to it. And so treating people with respect, communicating with them, and being aware of what's likely to come is really the most important things that you can do going forward. And Eric, I think I'm going to pause here and let's go ahead and take some questions and see if we can kind of do a little deeper dive collectively with Ron and Andrew. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Reid. Appreciate that. I think now what you can do when you think about communicating, planning, and just being flexible, we are seeing that with some of our best clients that they want to work together, and it takes a team approach to do that with the contractor, ourselves, and our clients to be able to work through these issues. So couldn't agree more with what you just shared there, Reid. So thank you. So I will start sharing some questions that have been coming in, and please feel free to keep sending more questions in as they're coming in. So I'm looking at questions that have come in and questions on another screen that are coming in. So I'll try to get to all these the best we can. So Andrew, this first question I'm going to direct to you. What has Benchmark done, recently to kind of help our clients work through some of these material supply issues?
Yeah, for projects that are in place or maybe already had a current design done, it's just trying to remain flexible to alternate ideas, especially when we talk about some of these major roofing components like insulation and fasteners being in very, very short supply. You kind of just have to keep yourself flexible to other design and installation methods. And then doing the backlog homework to figure out, that you're still meeting building code, you're still meeting insurance requirements, stuff like that. So that's the biggest thing you really need to keep your eye on.
And so, Andrew, have you had some success doing that?
Yeah, I have one particular project that, we've just finished bidding right when these shortages really started to come to light, and we've switched insulation since then. We were able to lock in some materials such as membrane and vapor retarder, but we did have to switch insulation types, which luckily went pretty smooth, but there's definitely going to be some projects where it's not going to be that easy.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Ron, the next question's for you, and it's what can corporations do to plan financially when prices are not being guaranteed? How can companies effectively plan?
Well, I think plan, first of all, to have a plan. When I see the companies that have probably navigated this turbulence the best, there's a couple of things that are common, and one of them is that they had a plan. And one client in particular that I think I've had the good fortune of having already bid and awarded all of their 2020 roof replacement projects in January of 2020. So they kind of beat the market and had all of that in place. So, obviously they had no idea that a pandemic was coming down the road and material shortages were coming, but it's a good example of the benefit of having a plan. But so if you have a plan, obviously, as Reid emphasized, the idea of being flexible, the idea of relationships. I think relationships pay, because if you have to steer clear of that plan, or in order to navigate, changes in timing or changes in pricing, at least you have a really, really strong starting point. And trusted relationships are certainly going to help in terms of validating price increases, or what is really the right price. And so if you have a trusted partnership, I think it puts you in a lot better position. And I think too, when I look at those that have navigated the best, and I think that are positioned best going forward, they've also got a certain, let's call it kind of a calm demeanor about it. When you look at lead times that are 3 to 6 months, I mean, you could kind of panic about that, or you can just say, okay, that's less than ideal, but it certainly benefited us to be, into the position, into the queue early. Maybe we can actually beat that. But if you wait, roofing, traditionally, we've seen it over the years, and I'm sure Reid has seen it going back into the 70s. It's oftentimes the place that people will wait till the end of the year. And if it's been a good year, oh yeah, then we'll go ahead and spend we'll try and squeeze in that roofing project before winter. Well, that's not going to work in this environment. You got to have a plan. You got to get out early, get organized, and be flexible. But I think maintain that calm demeanor, because this is going to take good strategic thinkers. It's going to take that integrated approach between contractor, material supplier, designer, building owner. But then even with the building owner, I think you got to think of it as the engineering team, the procurement team. How do we structure contracts? How do we do this in the most, kind of logical way and strategic way?
Thank you, Ron. And I'm going to follow up on that one a little bit. So as we're in July of 2021, when should I consider bidding a project for 2022 that I'd like to complete? What do I do today to get myself prepared for 2022?
You're directing that to me, Eric?
To you, Ron. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think one of the things I go back to the idea of having a plan, because one of the things that having a plan does for you is it enables you to prioritize. You really want a clear vision so you can prioritize. Those that rise to the top, we certainly have clients that are already, and it was already their normal course of business, that about this time of year, let's say late summer, fall, they're starting to talk about and work on next year's projects. Those building owners that are not accustomed to that typically wait till next year to get started on next year, I think you're going to miss the boat. You got to get started. You got to get in the queue. It could take an enormous amount of collaboration between designer, material supplier, contractor, building owner to figure out, okay, what's going to be the right mix of products. So time is on your side. You got to use time to the best benefit that you can. So I would get, it might, you might be tempted to say, oh, we don't know what the price is going to be, so I'm just going to sit it out. I think that's going to put you even further behind the 8 ball. And it's obviously less than ideal. I was intrigued by the audience response to the information coming from the roofing industry, and maybe being a little bit critical that we're not getting enough information. I think the reality is the information that we're getting, it's just not good news. So we don't like to hear it. But it's like, it is what it is right now. So it pays to get out there, have a plan, prioritize, and then invest in your relationships to collaborate, be strategic.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Reid, this question is going to come to you, and it really relates to the logistics piece you've talked some about. Can you touch on kind of the trucking industry and how that's impacting it locally here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I can. And I really appreciate the question. I actually apologize for not addressing it in my comments. You can't really talk about this shortage absent of talking about logistics. We have had in this country, and I'm really well aware of this issue because I served for 6 years on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in the House of Representatives. And this has been a crisis that's been in the making for decades. Our seaports are not dredged deep enough to handle Panamax ships, so we can't take the biggest ships into our seaports. Our infrastructure and interstate system are tremendously underfunded and not able to keep up with the amount of trucking that's going on. We have a near monopoly in rail. And so we have this kind of almost trifecta of badness when it comes on logistics. And then you add the fact that there is a massive labor shortage in the country. listen, roofing contractors can't find labor. The roofing industry is 50 to 60,000 workers short right now, but neither can the trucking industry. It's not as if there is this entire group or population of people that want to go into the trades of any type. And so we've got some real issues here. And until this gets dealt with in a cohesive national policy, and quite frankly, what I'm hearing coming out of DC today is a little bit disturbing because it's not addressing those key issues. Even the infrastructure package, that 600 billion or 700 billion that they're talking about, that's over 10 years or 8 years. It's woefully inadequate in that standpoint. And then they don't know how to pay for it. And so here's the best advice I can give you in regard to this, is you need to make sure that your place of business, I don't care whether it's a roofing contractor or it's an end user, because often materials are delivered right to that job site. That's especially true, it's totally true in new construction, but it's also true in re-roofing. You need to make sure that any shipper that is coming into your place of business is treated with gold gloves. Get them in and get them out as quickly as possible. Make sure that people handling their materials are as friendly as possible. And make sure there's a clean bathroom and possibly some donuts there for the driver as he or she waits for that truck to be unloaded. Because I'll tell you something, particularly independent drivers, they get to pick and choose where they go. There is so much demand on trucking right now, they can decide whether they want to deliver to you or not. And so you better make sure that you are the place of delivery that they want to go to, because you're going to get them back on the road as fast as possible. And but this has been 30, 40 years in the making, and it's going to take at least 20 years for us to get out of it. And someone asked a question, why are there so many ships waiting? I mean, you can go out and look outside the seaport in Los Angeles or outside Savannah, Georgia, and there's 100 ships out there waiting to be offloaded. That's because there's no workers to offload them. And so our birth rates in this country have been below replacement level for at least 6 or 7 years now. We've got 10 million Americans that are 10,000 Americans retiring a day, 3.5 million Americans retiring a year. And we don't have a base of population to replace them. And absent any type of pragmatic immigration reform that addresses our demographic changes in this country, we're going to be in a global war for labor in the next 10 to 15 years. And the U.S. better get its head out of the sand about where that workforce is going to come from, or we're going to be beaten globally on it. And so, sorry about the rant, but this is a problem that's not going to go away.
No, appreciate that, Reid. I know we've spent a lot of time here today talking about kind of the issues and what's been going on. Let's talk a little bit more about what can happen going forward. So, Andrew, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about how can we effectively. A question came in about working with FM, and how do we work with FM when with the change in materials that we may have a system that's not FM approved? We want to get a roof installed. What can we do? How can we approach that?
It's going to be a struggle because, I've been working with FM for 10 years now.
Andrew, could you actually, I should have explained who FM is, or FM Global.
Oh yeah, I can explain. Yeah,
please.
So FM Global and FM Approvals, two different, sides of the same company, but they're an insurance company that they're the largest commercial insurance company in the nation. They set a lot of rules for roofing. They have a very extensive roof testing plan and approvals process. So they dictate a lot of what the roofing industry does on the installation side. They have testing regulations. They test roof assemblies. They put them into a database. So you have to have a tested assembly if you're an FM insured client. That being said, they are usually pretty strict. They don't like to veer away from their rules and regulations. So the good news is they have over 1 million tested assemblies. So you should be able to find a good starting point at least. But you have to have that conversation early. If you have to veer away and install a separate material, I'd say it's a 50-50 chance that you're going to have success with that. But if you have the conversation early saying, hey, we need to substitute this fastener that's approved in these other assemblies, but not this one that we're trying to get through, you need to have that conversation as early as you can. Be as polite as possible as you can with them. I've had pretty good luck with them in the past, but that's really the best advice I can give is get there early and be courteous.
Yeah, so it's taking the time to engage them in the process early and have those conversations with them if there are options that need to veer from that. So thank you.
And also come prepared with a solution. That's also kind of a third one to throw in there. Don't just ask them what you can do because they're going to say, I'll find another assembly that works. If you can come prepared with some sort of substitution, that's going to help you out a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I want to, could you touch on building code authorities as well? Experience working with building code authorities, if you have to make some changes as well, how that's impacted, or what can you do to move through that process as well?
Yeah, so building codes or building authorities, I guess, would be a better term. They're going to be a little less informed overall on what's going on. I highly doubt most of them really know about the specific roofing shortages. They have to wear a lot of different hats, so they're not going to be specifically knowledgeable on roofing and what's going on. I wouldn't expect you're going to get a ton of leeway, especially on new construction jobs where maybe re-roofing if you have some height issues, but I wouldn't expect a whole lot of leeway from building officials just because they're going to look at the code and say, well, the code says this, so you need to do that. So I wouldn't anticipate much flexibility there.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I would ask if you've got a question that's on your mind, please go ahead and submit those as we're working our way through those. But the next question really focuses on innovation. What innovations do you anticipate being developed as a result of both labor and material shortages? And I'm going to ask all three of you this, but Reid, I'll start with you. If there's things you can share as you see innovations that could help address this going forward.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an innovation or if it's a step backwards. The reality is, I think you're going to see manufacturers reducing SKUs rather than having insulations available in multiple thicknesses. They're going to cut those down to just providing the major thicknesses like 1.5 inch, 2 inch, and so on. They're going to reduce colors available in metal. They're going to reduce colors available in other steep slope products. And they might even reduce the methods of attachment. And so, but at the end of the day, I think these types of problems. Oh, another thing I think you're going to see them step back is they may step back away from the just-in-time inventory management for a while until this all shakes out. And so, but I'm not sure. The roofing industry is a really mature industry. And there hasn't been tons and tons of new innovative products per se in the last 20 years or so, where we used to have all these breakout new products that were coming in the 80s and 90s, and you're not seeing that so much anymore. Consumers have found comfort with the products that are there. So that would be my comments on innovation. Thanks,
Reid. Ron, would you have some thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, I think the most innovative thing I've heard is chocolate donuts, to have chocolate donuts ready for the truckers as they pull into your lot. I think that's got some real merit. But all joking aside, I'm going to say, first of all, I didn't invite anybody on the call. We just re-roofed our own building here at Benchmark, of all things. And we did beat the market, so we got a good price on all those materials, but we actually installed a bit of a showcase with 14 different roof systems, some of which are pretty new and innovative. So it gives people an opportunity to see a variety of different roof systems. But I'm going to say the most innovative thing I would suggest is more of a shift in mindset. I cannot emphasize it enough. The collaboration that I think that is going to be necessary. If we think of the beauty of capitalism, this is a crisis. There are going to be some people, some companies that figure this out, do more than make the best of it. They are going to shine in this moment. So who is that going to be? And honestly, I think who that's going to be is those that they have this strategic team. They collaborate. They pull that roofing contractor base together. They sit down with the designer. the material suppliers, okay, maybe we have to start with the material that's available. Okay, what can we get our hands on, and how can we design? And as Andrew alluded to, you know, if you're an FM insured client, you probably want to engage FM into that discussion early. But I really think there's more options available than people realize, but you can't be on an island, you know, kind of going it alone. It's going to take a cooperative mindset. And I know that's not necessarily a traditional form of innovation, but I believe that's what it's going to be. A cohesive team, well organized, going together is going to have a competitive advantage.
Ron, I think that is an innovative solution, because in some cases people have a mindset there's adversarial relationships in this industry at times.
Right.
And we've seen and experienced this working with clients recently, of putting those teams together and having more success. So I think that's a real sound idea.
Yeah, and I want to just make sure and mention that, you know, I grew up on the roof contracting side of the fence, similar to Reid, and I just have great respect for that community, love that community, and you know, I'm proud of my heritage there. And there's never been a more difficult time to run a roofing contracting company. Come on, let's be real. On top of this material shortage, the labor shortage, it's just difficult. So we, you know, as an owner, as a building owner, if you want to get successful projects at good prices, done on time, on budget, safely, man, I think you got to, you know, invest in those relationships and that overall kind of strategic approach.
Thanks, Ron. Andrew, anything else you want to add to that as we're on the innovation question?
Yeah, I kind of looked at this as like specific possibilities of different types of roof systems to install, which, I mean, we're so short on every type of materials, like we've been saying. But I think it's a couple options. It's pretty much turning back in time a little bit. I think ballasted roofs right now could be a pretty viable option. You know, it's going to take all your adhesives out of the situation. You still need some fasteners here and there. And then hot asphalt. I mean, asphalt's not super readily available, but it's probably easier to get your hands on than low-rise foam or fasteners. The only issue is, like we've talked about, labor shortages. The skilled labor to install hot asphalt is very quickly dwindling away in this country. There's pockets that still install it, like Minnesota, for example, still uses quite a bit of it. But that skilled labor to use a kettle and run a kettle safely is definitely disappearing. But as those maybe become more popular, those materials are going to dry out, and then you'll have to find, you know, what's available next. So it's just going to be a give and take kind of thing for a long time, I think.
Okay. Thank you. So Andrew, a question related to what if I can't get my materials right now? I have a roof that I want to replace, but I can't get materials. What are my options? What do I do to get me through? What do I do right now?
Well, it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer right now. Obviously, if you have a good relationship with a repair contractor, get them up there, make sure you're taking care of any issues that are going to hit you quickly. And then after that, it's just trying to design around what's available. That's really the only answer I have at this point. It's everything's fluctuating so much. It's hard to really say, definitely go this way or that way. It depends on where you're at in the country. It depends because, you know, if you're going to hit winter or if you have an available construction season in the winter, maybe you can still get some work done around December or January. But if you're in Iowa, you know, you're going to be packing up in October or November for the year, not be ready until April. So it's just getting ready for April at that point.
Right. I will share, we have had a client recently dealing with a situation where they're not going to, projects getting delayed till 2022, and it's over an area where they don't want to have leaks in. So we approached it with a repair spec to address the repairs that are there almost on an emergency basis. We did some overlays of some areas, or working on some overlays of some big repair areas. but the intent is how do we get through the winter of 2021 and into 2022? And that was a combination working with the facility, working with the local contractor, and Benchmark working together to say, okay, here's where we are. How do we get us through this situation for the next 6 to 12 months? And that worked out pretty well.
There's also the opportunity, if you have the ability to store materials and you know that you have some work coming up, there is the opportunity of purchasing materials, directly, not through a contractor. If you want to take the responsibility to store them until you can get everything on site, ordering some materials now is better than not ordering any. So definitely an option.
Okay. I want to come back to your ballasted question, Andrew, where you said, ballasted systems may be an option in coming back. How do you get ballasted systems, or how do you work with FM when it comes to ballasted systems?
Yeah, so there's definitely some restrictions, not just with FM, but with the building code. You have to be under certain heights. You have to be in a certain, if you're on a coastline, you're not going to be able to probably, especially a Florida coastline, you're not going to be putting a ballasted system on. So it just takes the work up front with code officials and with FM. FM, I don't think really, they don't love ballasted systems, but it could be one of those things you can work with them and say, hey, we've got the testing elsewhere. Can we get an approval this time?
Okay. Any other thoughts on that from Ron or Reid?
Not specifically.
No,
Okay.
not really. I thought Andrew did great.
Okay. A question came in about, several questions came in about pricing, and Reid, I may come to you first on these, but could material commodities be bid with pricing indexes? We'll start with that one.
Probably not. Some of it is commodity driven because the raw materials are often attached to the commodities market. But all these materials, all those finished goods are a blend of various polymers to get to the finished product. So it's driven a bit by commodities markets already, but for example, as you see the price of oil go up, you should expect any type of petroleum distillate that goes into roofing to drive the price of roofing up. It's hard because the end user is getting a finished good, not just a composite of commodities.
Okay.
Reid, I had a question for you. As you reflect on pricing and I know none of us have a crystal ball, but we just recently saw a spike in lumber and then it fell back.
Yeah.
I mean, compare that to what you think is the roofing curve. Is any chance it's falling back, or do you think it's going to be riding still on a crest?
No, I think in some cases it's going to fall back. We're in an issue of supply and demand, right?
Right.
You mentioned earlier, capitalistic society, which is what we're in. So prices are under pressure from supply and demand. Right now, demand is high, supply is low. People are willing to pay more, and it's costing more to get stuff out the door. That's just the harsh reality of it. I would be very nervous as a roofing contractor to be inventorying a lot of product right now, because I think you're absolutely right. I think at some point this all catches up. The marketplace will ultimately begin delaying purchases, or they get frustrated. They'll just put it off, and you'll start to see supply come in alignment with demand and prices dropping. That would be the normal cycle. And a lot of national home builders who were stockpiling plywood are regretting that today.
Right. And one thing I'd like to mention, kind of on the heels of Andrew's comment about storing materials, I think just be really wise about that. Don't, probably go too hog wild with the idea of, and we don't want to see anybody in the industry kind of hoarding materials, because that just exacerbates the whole problem. But I would say that if someone is going to have a situation where they're going to be storing materials leading up to a project, and it might be a longer term storage than normal, I personally am not a big believer in tarps. I think you got to work with your client and let's find some inside storage. If it's going to be sitting out in the weather, the last thing you want to do is buy a bunch of materials and then open up the tarps in the spring of 22 to find out it's contaminated. So be wise about that approach.
Yeah, very good point.
And I would also, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't answer one of the questions earlier on your polling about the industry not being responsive on getting information out. We don't have a lot of vehicles with which to get information out other than through our members and through the design community and contracting community. But for those on the call here, and there's a good group of you, over 160, you can go to nrca.net. We have an entire separate page specifically on this issue that is updated weekly, and you can stay up to speed on that. And so nrca.net, we're updating it for our members and for consumers as well.
Thanks, Reid. Ron, I got another question for you, and it really relates to your earlier discussion about planning and timing. But a lot of questions have come in related to, what can we do now and how do we prepare? Could you talk about the importance of knowing what you have, knowing what your assets are today so you can plan?
Well, if you think about it in about any environment, but especially in an environment where there's such turbulence, knowing where you're at is huge. I mean, it sounds rather elementary, but to have current information about, okay, what do I own? What's the condition of what I own? And what ideally would I be doing with that, planning for it. But I think I go back to the idea of one of the things that you, when you have good information, then you can navigate ahead and you can also prioritize. So I just can't, probably emphasize that enough. And, like what, you could prioritize and develop a plan for going forward. Having that good plan is going to put you in a position where you can, create alternatives as needed. But I think one of the situations, if we can get through the next 18 months, 2 years of high turbulence, without just throwing in the towel, it's saying, because if you kind of just go into zero spend mode, then your assets are going to deteriorate, your emergencies are going to stack up. I think it's got to be really prioritized based on where you have the highest risk. Sometimes there's roofs that you just let them die a natural death. Maybe we can't really invest in them, but to identify your assets that are over critical facilities, food production, motor control centers, hospitals, et cetera. Hey, think of the essential occupancies, and hopefully in your planning, those stand out. It's a little bit of triage, granted, but you gotta manage around priorities right now. And I think priorities number one can't just be the worst condition. I think priority number one needs to be, where do I have the highest risk?
And Ron, I think so. Preventive maintenance and repairs become critically important, because you can't have assets falling from where you can extend that life to where they have to fall into failure mode.
Certainly.
Repair and maintenance is critical in this situation to apply that. We're going to have one last question, and it relates to the impact of this situation on large and small roofing contractors, and how could that potentially impact our end users. And Reid, could you touch on what you're seeing with the impact of this on both large and small contractors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural for a manufacturer or distributor to take care of their biggest customers first. So you shouldn't be surprised that some of the larger contractors might have a leg up on some of the smaller contractors. But without defining what a small contractor is, it's hard to answer that question. But, a mom and pop roofing company in rural Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, they could struggle a bit more than what one of the larger, more sophisticated companies would, or what some of the regional and national companies would. But also remember that those large national companies they're only going to get a portion of their overall allotment. It's just larger than what the smaller guy is going to get. And so everybody's in a bad place right now. Distribution is trying to satisfy the needs of their clients. And they're doing the very best they can. And so whether you've got a small, medium, or large contractor, communicate with them and let them be well aware of what your needs are. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Reid. It looks like we're at the end of our time for the day, but I would like to encourage everyone. I think we got through most of the questions. I know there are a few we didn't get to. We will follow up with you individually if we did not. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. If you have additional questions, if you're struggling with the situation on how do we move forward, please get a hold of us. We will send some follow-up information so you have contact information, or you can contact Andrew, Ron, myself, or Reid. I believe our contact information was in the presentation. But thank you for joining us today, and hope you have a great Thursday afternoon and the rest of the week. Thank you, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.